Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three martinis coming up.
Bad, and crazy martinis for you today. And Jim, I guess on this first one, there's a couple different options on which could be the bad part here. But it's the ongoing battle between the federal government, the Biden administration, and the state of Texas over border security. Biden, of course, is doing a horrific job of securing our border. But generally speaking, the courts have ruled that it is the federal government's job. The question now becomes, what do you do if they don't want to do it? So a few days ago, the Supreme Court, in a 5-4 ruling, removed an injunction against the Department of Homeland Security that had forbid them from removing razor wire placed along the border by the state of Texas. And so Abbott basically saying that the executive branch of the United States has a constitutional duty to enforce federal laws protecting states, including immigration laws on the books right now. President Biden has instructed his agencies to ignore federal statutes that mandate the detention of illegal immigrants. The failure of the Biden administration to fulfill the duties imposed by Article 4, Section 4 has triggered Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3, which reserves to this state the right of self-defense. For these reasons, I have already declared an invasion under Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3, to invoke Texas's constitutional authority to defend itself and protect itself. That authority is the supreme law of the land and supersedes any federal statutes to the contrary. And that has a lot of Texas Democrats and Democrats outside of Texas basically saying that this is Greg Abbott defying a clear ruling from the Supreme Court, including Beto O'Rourke chirping up to say that he's using the Texas Guard to defy a Supreme Court ruling. When Governor Faubus did this in 1957, President Eisenhower federalized the Arkansas Guard to ensure compliance with the law, and that, of course, dealt with school integration. But your colleague, Ed Whalen, from the Ethics and Public Policy Center, but also writer of bench memos for National Review, says Abbott is not defying a Supreme Court ruling. The court vacated an injunction against the federal government. It did not order Texas to do or not do anything. And the court still has to deal with the overall merits of the case. So, Jim, a lot of people calling this a constitutional crisis as they look at this showdown. How do you see it?
Yeah, I was going to say, you look at the likely nomination of Donald Trump, the presidency of Joe Biden, you're like, well, we were definitely going to get a constitutional crisis in 2024. We're just getting it earlier than we expected and not on the issues we expected. Greg, has Governor Abbott been accused of launching an insurrection yet?
Not that I'm aware of, but they're getting close.
I figure that's the next step. Look, there's a editorial from the editors of National Review on this. I don't think there's any dispute that on the matter of policy, the state of Texas is correct, that there is there continues to be waves of migrants coming over the border. The federal efforts to prevent this are woefully insufficient. They feel a need to take further action to protect their citizens, and they're operating within the stated powers of the state government under the state constitution. The editors kind of lay out and say, okay, precedent indicates that immigration enforcement is a federal government responsibility and that the state cannot take that responsibility upon its own shoulders. But the assumption is that the federal government would be using its powers and it would be enforcing those laws and it would be rising to the occasion to deal with the problem instead of letting it slide. And the editors write today, the underlying problem of a rogue administration discarding federal law is one that cannot be solved by piecemeal federal court orders around the margins. Congress has the power of the purse, oversight hearings, and impeachment as remedies. Abbott is escalating the issue by invoking his authority to repel invasions, a further crisis engendered by this administration's dereliction of duty. Now, I just kind of look at this and I marvel at this. And I think the entire concept of, when the founding fathers set up, if you're a state, you can't just run around and decide that you're going to start taking over the powers of the federal government, whether it be border enforcement or you decide to fight a war or you decide to have your own diplomacy separate from the federal government's diplomacy or things like that. You can't just go off and do things that we have set aside as the duties and powers of the federal government. But it was all just kind of assumed that the federal government would always be doing those responsibilities and using those powers, that they wouldn't just decide, we don't feel like enforcing that law. It's not quite what the Biden administration has done, but it has minimized or not is not enforcing immigration law nearly as forcefully and widely and effectively as not just the people in Texas would. I think the entire country is. Just look at the public polling on this. So kind of wish the Supreme Court had taken a more clarifying stance on this. There's still the Fifth Circuit can rule on the Texas lawsuit, and this may end up before the Supreme Court's again. But in the end, it looks like if you want a different border enforcement policy, you need to change presidents, which means nothing's going to happen between now and November, or really January 20th of next year. And even after that, it would take some time to get these new policies in place.
Well, if you're a Supreme Court justice or you're just trying to keep up with this whole thing, you're going to need some excellent sleep. And for that, you want Magnesium Breakthrough by Bio-Optimizers. Improving sleep is important, and magnesium is the #1 mineral to make that happen. And right now, you get 10% off any order at biooptimizers.com/martini and use the promo code martini.
Now, there are a lot of other magnesium supplements out there, but a lot of them give you just 1 or 2 forms of magnesium. Magnesium Breakthrough contains all 7 forms of magnesium, and it's designed to help you calm your mind and help you fall asleep, help you stay asleep, and wake up refreshed. In addition to experiencing relaxed sleep, Magnesium Breakthrough helps improve digestion, supports muscle recovery, and can even support healthy bone density.
So do yourself a favor and make Magnesium Breakthrough part of your daily routine this year so you can get the vitality you need to conquer your dreams. Go to biooptimizers.com/martini and enter the promo code martini to get 10% off any order. Again, that's biooptimizers.com/martini, biooptimizers.com/martini. All right, Jim, let's talk about polls. We just had a poll at the start of the week showing that 80% of Americans supported Israel against Hamas. We noted a couple of troubling points among younger adults, 18 to 24. Thought 57% of them thought that Israel was committing genocide against Palestinians, and among 25 to 34, it was dead even. But still, 80 to 20 on any issue, particularly one of that consequence, is definitely a good sign. We also have a new poll, though, out of the West Bank. And so hats off to Free Beacon for flagging this one. 0% of Palestinians in the West Bank described Hamas's October 7th terror attacks as illegitimate resistance against Israel. This is a poll from the Qatar-based Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies, and West Bank respondents were asked whether the attacks constituted an illegitimate operation. 79% said the attacks were legitimate. 11% said they were flawed, but a legitimate resistance operation. And 4% said they were a legitimate operation that involved heinous or criminal acts. Support for the position that the October 7th attacks were an illegitimate operation did not register a single percentage point, and 6% said they didn't know. So, Jim, it's hard to have a lot of sympathy. It's also easier when you're not in the middle of the war to go spouting off like this. But this idea that we're going to be able to line up a 2-state solution and forge peace in the Middle East with these kind of numbers is pie in the sky thinking.
Greg, when you listen to conversations about Israel and the Palestinians, Israel and Hamas, Israel and Gaza and the West Bank, over here in the United States, you often find those who are most critical of Israel are kind of imagining or envisioning a Palestinian population and leadership that is more reasonable, more rational, less violent, and honestly just less extreme than the actual Palestinian population is. And I wish we were dealing with that Palestinian population that they're describing. It'd be a lot easier if this imaginary Palestinian people who were reasonable and rational and willing to take half a loaf and willing to stop trying to call for the elimination of the entire state of Israel, if some sort of this demand were met or if that demand were met, and if the core of their demands were not the eradication of the state of Israel. That's the one we've got. And it's been very popular to kind of say, well, look, that's Hamas, that's Hezbollah, that's these extremist groups. But there are a lot of innocent, good Palestinians out there. And look, are there Palestinian civilians who are not taking up arms against Israel? Yes. Are there Palestinian children who don't deserve any of this? Yes. Are there Palestinian senior citizens who don't deserve to have a building collapse or get hit by shrapnel from an explosion? Yeah, that's true. But anti-Hamas voices within the Palestinian people are few and far between. And yes, some of this is likely going to be exacerbated during a time of open conflict. You're going to get more Palestinians who say, look, I don't like Fatah. I think they're all a bunch of corrupt bastards. And Hamas, at least they're willing to stand up and fight for me. You're going to get more of that during a time of war than during a time of relative peace. But I don't think we can look at this and say, well, the Palestinians have a very reasonable position. No, they don't, because the Palestinian position is the Hamas attack on October 7th is hunky-dory. It's perfectly fine. It's morally legitimate. It's perfectly normal to put babies into microwaves or whatever the hell it was and shoot civilians and kidnap senior citizens and do all of those terrible and rape and all that. They don't have moral objections to that because they've convinced themselves that everybody in Israel deserves to die. Military, civilian, old, young, men, women, the whole nine yards. So that's the state of things. So you look at that. The first thing is like, okay, we're not going to have a two-state solution. We're not going to have some reasonable summit and peace talks and redraw some lines on a map and everybody's going to live happily ever after. Israel has to destroy Hamas. In the process, innocent, Palestinian civilians are going to die. It's really unfortunate. I wish there was a different way to do this. I wish there was a better way of doing this. But you can't say to Israel, you have to live with this terrorist group that plots to kill all of your people and that has demonstrated a capacity to kill lots of your people, because otherwise the consequences for Palestinian civilians are just too severe. Israel rejects that philosophy. Israel rejects that calculation, and it's only rational. Otherwise, you're asking them to live with a constant mortal threat living right next door.
Very well said. And, what do they say? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Well, that's what just about every administration has tried to do in the Middle East, especially since this idea of the two-state solution got going. And that's why it was so original to see the approach towards the Abraham Accords bypass that whole situation with the Palestinians and help Israel forge economic and diplomatic, all sorts of different relations with different countries around the region, whether it's Bahrain or the UAE or Morocco and what have you. And that seemed to really be working. And so this idea of the Biden administration going back to this that this has to be the linchpin to any sort of long-term progress in the Middle East, you're basically banging your head against a wall, but they just don't want to see reality. All right, well, let's talk about something way better than that, and that is 4Patriots and the fantastic deals you can find at 4patriots.com/martini. You'll get great deals on products from generators or to survival food kits. You'll also get things like the Sauna Wrap Therapeutic Blanket, right now 80% off. That sounds pretty good for the wintertime, right? Also, the Starfire Camp Stove. Buy 3 of those and get 1 free. Don't forget about, though, the best-selling survival food kits. They are delicious tasting. They're designed to last for 25 years if stored properly. They come with real food, like real meat and vegetables, so it's actually good for you. Perfect for taking on camping trips or picnics, but it's best and most important to have in an emergency. If power is out, all you have to do is boil water, mix in the food kits, simmer, and serve. Visit 4patriots.com/martini to see this week's discounts and deals before they are gone, and get free shipping on orders over $97. Save more and get peace of mind now by going to the number 4patriots.com/martini. That's 4patriots.com/martini. All right, Jim, on to our crazy martini now. And just a minute ago, we gave credit to President Trump for thinking more outside the box with the Abraham Accords. And then he comes up with ideas like this. The idea, well, when you're in a presidential campaign and the primary phase is to distinguish yourself from your rivals. And then as the field gets whittled down, which they are now down to 2, it's time to make peace and try to get everybody on the same page and at least have your base ready to go. But that's not how Donald Trump is looking at this. Not in any way, shape, or form. Truth Social last night, he calls her Nikki Birdbrain Haley. I knew Nikki well. She was average at best and is not the one to take on world leaders, and she never did, which I guess raises the question why you would pick her if, in fact, that were the case. But she generally had pretty good reviews. He says, that was up to me, and that is why they respected the United States. He says, when I ran for office and won, I noticed that the losing candidate's donors would immediately come to me and want to help out. This is standard in politics, but no longer with me. Anybody that makes a contribution to Birdbrain from this moment forth will be permanently barred from the MAGA camp. We don't want them, and will not accept them, because we put America first and always will. And Jim, I'm sure you've seen conversations back and forth back when DeSantis and others were in the race, the vitriol going back and forth. And then folks on the Trump side would say, you're not welcome back. We're going to beat you. And then we don't even want your votes. Do you actually want to win? Because if you don't want anybody that preferred a different candidate in your own party's primary, you're going to be pretty lonely, and you're going to have a really, really, really unfortunate night in November.
You know, Greg, on one of the other podcasts that I appear over at National Review, I said that Donald Trump always finds a way to focus on the stupidest or least important issue in front of him. You know, my favorite example is when he rants about what Don Lemon said about him, or Mika Brzezinski, or whoever he saw on cable news, this particularly during his presidency. And I'm sitting there thinking, like, you're president. You're in the Oval Office. Every day you get the presidential daily brief, which is probably full of all kinds of reports about what's going on overseas and potential threats. You know, you have issues related to the economy, issues related to the border, you know, a million pieces of legislation coming up on Capitol Hill. There's a lot of stuff you could be worrying about. There's a lot of stuff you could be thinking about. But instead, you think about something that nobody's going to remember 24 hours from now. And then, in fact, by jumping on social media and raging about it, you call further attention to this thing that most people were not going to pay attention to. Of all the problems Donald Trump faces right now, the fact that people are donating to Nikki Haley is really not one of them. Right? Donald Trump has effectively won the nomination. Yes, only 2 states have gone, but he's won both Iowa and New Hampshire. He's probably going to win South Carolina by a pretty darn solid margin. May win in a landslide. And he's probably going to win, if not every primary and caucus ahead of us. He'll probably win almost all of them. He doesn't really have to worry about Nikki Haley that much. And as you alluded to, if anything, he should be worrying about, all right, how do I get the people in the Nikki Haley camp into my camp for the general election? You may have noticed that not all of the head-to-head polling against Biden is looking great. The Pennsylvania ones, it looks like Biden's, the latest polls indicate that Biden is well ahead. I heard a very interesting theory that much of Biden's lousy polling over the past year were from people who didn't really follow politics that well and who didn't really think that Trump would be the Republican nominee. They figured there'd be some other Republican, some other generic, better, more likable, less controversial Republican. And that was what was making Biden look worse. That when it's going to come down to Trump versus Biden, more Americans are going to say, I'm not happy with the way things are going, but I can't go back to the craziness of Trump. I'll go with Biden. I don't know how it's going to shake out, but I do think if you're the Trump campaign, you should be worried about that. I do think you should be worried about unifying Republicans. I do think you should be trying to win over as many independents as possible. I think the fact that Nikki Haley is indicating she's got a much higher appeal to independents is probably a flashing red light you should pay attention to. But this stuff is never going to enter the mind of Donald Trump, or very rarely, because Donald Trump always focuses on his feelings and how does he feel and how he's been so disrespected and how dare she run against him, blah, blah, blah. Like, this is a very ominous indicator for the general election. Donald Trump is just going to go up there and rant about 2020 and rant about how it was stolen. And he's going to spend much less time talking about the issues before the country. Cost of living, inflation, the border, all that kind of stuff. And, his odds of winning are going to be hurt by that. And the Republicans are going to go up against a very weak incumbent, but, potentially blow the opportunity because the candidate can't focus on what matters to the public as a whole and can only focus on what has hurt his feelings most recently. But hey, good luck, America.
Well, it's one thing to kind of give people time, they're passionate about their candidate, whoever it might be, to come around because, then you think, well, it's either him or Biden. Maybe I can go ahead and support him, even though I was very strongly in favor of somebody else in the primary. It also, based on what you said about some of the polling, reiterates a point we were talking about not that long ago, where just because people don't approve of you doesn't necessarily mean they're going to vote for the other guy. They might not vote at all. There have been plenty of unpopular Republicans who are up for re-election, and as badly as we were maybe disappointed in them, it's not like you're going to go out there and go, you know what? I think John Kerry would be great. Yeah, Bush has had a couple of issues here. I think John Kerry would be great. Most people don't make that leap if they've already voted in this same matchup a different way 4 years ago. So the idea that Biden's horrific approval numbers, which make him vulnerable, are necessarily going to translate to people voting differently. It might in some cases, but it also might not in a lot of cases. So you got to be able to try and reach out and try to win over some people, and just instead of just saying, well, you weren't with me all the way, so forget
Fall
you.
In line, obey, bend the knee, kiss the ring. Yeah, there are some people who will not sign on to that.
Yeah, it's more flies with honey than vinegar, right? That strategy might change, or it's going to be a pretty rough few months here for the former president. Anyway, Jim, on that note, Thursday is in the books, and I will talk to you tomorrow. It'll actually be Friday.
Talk to you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. Please subscribe to the 3 Martini Lunch podcast if you don't already, and tell some friends about us as well. Also, thank you for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. If you haven't done that yet, please help us out in that department. It really does make a difference. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a terrific Thursday, and join us again on Friday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.